Have you ever stood alone in the middle of nowhere and felt something watching you? Not an animal, not a person, something older, something that doesn't belong to this world. Tonight, we're heading into the heart of Badlands National Park, a place that has swallowed hikers, haunted rangers, and left more questions than bodies. What you're about to hear are real stories told by those who were stationed there, men and women trained to face danger, who still refuse to talk about what they saw when the sun went down. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. We share real horror stories, the kind you can't forget, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends. So before we begin, take a second, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications, because you don't want to miss what's coming next. And one more thing, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Because after hearing these stories, you might just think twice about going camping alone. I remember the call that night. It was a little after 7, just before the sun dropped behind the ridge. I'd been wrapping up paperwork in the outpost cabin, the kind of day where the quiet almost hums. The park had been empty since the last storm. Mud still covered parts of the main trail. I was halfway through a stale sandwich when the radio crackled to life. Dispatch to Ranger Miller, possible missing hiker, last known at Sage Creek Basin. At first, I didn't think much of it. People go missing in the Badlands all the time. It's a maze out there, gullies, false ridges, places that eat sound. You could yell your lungs out, and no one would hear you. I'd been through worse calls before. Lost tourists, drunk campers, folks thinking they could cut through miles of prairie after dark. But the tone in the dispatcher's voice, it had that weight. The kind that comes when you already know something's wrong. The report said a man named Caleb Mercer, 34, was hiking alone. He'd checked in at the ranger station that morning, heading for Sage Creek Basin. According to his GPS ping, his device stopped transmitting just before noon. Same spot where we'd lost signal before. Locals called it the shifting ground. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, thermal scope, body cam, two-way, and headed out. The wind had already started picking up, a dry whistle cutting through the canyons. By the time I reached the edge of the basin, the last light had drained from the sky. Sage Creek is different from the rest of the park. The land folds in on itself, like it's been melted and reshaped 100 times. Standing there at night feels like being inside something alive, breathing, slow, and deep. I parked the truck by the ridge and checked my radio. Static, the kind that shifts between tones, as if trying to form words. I tried the GPS next. Nothing but flat lines and frozen coordinates. It wasn't unusual that Basin had been swallowing signals for years, but the silence out there pressed in from all sides. No crickets, no wind in the grass, just a low hum that could have been the earth itself. I started down the path with my flashlight sweeping left to right. The beam caught prints in the dust hiking boots, medium size, heading toward the cliffs. So far, so normal. I followed them for about a mile, until I noticed something strange. The prints looped. First a wide arc, then tighter, like the hiker had turned in circles. They overlapped several times before stopping abruptly at the edge of a drop. I knelt, shining my light over the ledge. No sign of a fall, no broken brush, no disturbed soil, just emptiness below. It was as if he'd reached the edge and vanished. I radioed in again. "Base, this is Miller. I've got tracks terminating at the cliff. No descent marks. Over. Static. Then, faintly, Miller. Back. I froze. That wasn't dispatch. The voice was mine. I lowered the radio. Checked. The frequency. Tried again. Nothing. Just my own breathing echoing in my ears. By 9 p.m., I'd started a grid search. Every few yards I marked with glow tape, careful not to lose my path. The temperature dropped fast, and the wind carried sand in sheets across the basin. I could barely see past 30 feet. The flashlight beam danced through the dust, catching glimpses of twisted rock that almost looked like faces, hollow eyes, open mouths. I kept hearing movement ahead, soft steps, like someone pacing just out of sight. When I called out, "Caleb, this is Park Ranger Miller. If you can hear me, call out." The sound would stop, and then I'd hear it again, behind me. The thermal scope flickered with heat, signatures brief, erratic shapes that disappeared before I could focus. One moment they looked human, the next they weren't there at all. I told myself it was the wind, interference, anything that made sense. But the voices started soon after. First, faint, like radio feedback forming words, then clearer, distant, but close enough that I could make out my name. Miller. This way. The worst part? It sounded exactly like me. My tone, my rhythm. I'd heard recordings of my own voice enough times to know it wasn't mimicry. It was identical. I tried to trace it, but every time I turned toward the sound, it shifted, once to the left, then behind. At one point, it came from directly in front of me, and I swear I saw a figure standing just beyond the fog. I blinked, and it was gone. Around midnight, I decided to pull back toward camp. My flashlight had begun to dim, and my radio battery was nearly drained. I marked my direction and started retracing my steps, following the glow tape. Except the tape was gone. Every strip I'd placed gone. The rocks, the brush, the path, all wrong. It was like the terrain had changed while I was walking. I should have been near the ridge by then, but the cliffs looked different, closer, jagged. When I checked the ground, I noticed footprints again, deep impressions in the sand, same tread pattern as mine. I followed them, desperate for orientation, until I realized what I was looking at. They were my prints, the ones I'd made earlier, but ahead of me. Footsteps that led the way I was walking, before I'd even taken those steps. It didn't make sense. I stopped, scanning with the flashlight. The prints continued straight ahead, curving slowly toward my camp. They looked fresh, too fresh, like they were being made just moments before I arrived. I started to feel dizzy. The air was thicker. The sound of wind had vanished again. Every few seconds, my body cam emitted a faint click, like it was turning on and off by itself. When I finally saw my tent light through the fog, I felt a rush of relief. But as I got closer, I noticed the zipper hanging open and the flap moving like something had gone inside. I raised my light. Empty. The sleeping bag was laid out perfectly. My spare boots were lined up neatly beside it, but on the folding table, next to the lantern, lay a single object that hadn't been there before. My radio, turned off, covered in dust. I checked my body cam later, after sunrise. I'd managed to make it back to the truck sometime before dawn, though I barely remembered walking there. The footage ran for hours, mostly static and wind noise, but just after midnight, the image warped, then cleared for a few seconds. In that, a moment, I could see the beam of my flashlight sweeping over the ridge. The camera tilted down, and there were footprints, but the feed glitched, and something stepped into view, faint, humanoid, faceless. The light hit it directly, and the frame tore apart. When the video stabilized, I was standing alone except for a shape reflected in the lens. My reflection, but it was looking the wrong way. When I brought it to the investigation team, the footage had been wiped. All of it, except for that single frame, me staring back, but not aligning with the body movement. They asked if it was a technical fault. Maybe the data corrupted. Maybe my memory played tricks. But I know what I saw, and every time I close my eyes, I still see that reflection standing just a little too still, waiting for me to move first. 2 weeks later, they officially closed the Mercer case. The report listed environmental disorientation, possible fall. I signed the paperwork, like I was supposed to, but I never told them about the second set of tracks, or the voice that matched mine, or the moment I watched my own footprints lead me through the fog. I've worked that park for 20 years. I've seen weather patterns twist like living things, seen mirages that feel real enough to touch. But what happened at Sage Creek, it's not something I can write off as illusion. Sometimes, on quiet nights, the radio still comes alive. Faint static, then silence, then a voice that says, "Miller, back," always in my tone, always from somewhere too close. Chapter 3. The Campsite at Devil's Gulch. I've worked the Badlands long enough to know when the forest feels awake. There's a rhythm to it, a breathing you can sense if you stand still long enough. That night at Devil's Gulch, the rhythm was gone. The call came just after 9 p.m. 2 campers, a couple from Rapid City, frantic on the line. They'd set up at Site 7, a clearing tucked between ridges where the pines grow tight and tall, and they were whispering that something was moving in the trees. "Eyes," the man kept saying. "They keep blinking back at us." The woman's voice trembled behind him, asking if anyone else was out there. Dispatch couldn't trace movement on the trail cameras, but the motion sensors had been tripping every few minutes. No heat signatures, no animal IDs, just empty triggers. I grabbed my kit and drove out alone. The road to the gulch runs like a scar through the hills, gravel, blind curves, no service past the ridge. The Bessons, night was clear, moonlight silvering the tops of the trees. Still, it felt heavy, like the woods were listening. When I reached the first checkpoint, the temperature had dropped nearly 10 degrees. That's common in the basins, but the way the air held still made me uneasy. I logged my arrival, left the truck headlights on, and started up the trail. The path wound through narrow pines. The camper's tent light was visible from 100 yards out, a dull glow, swaying like a heartbeat behind the trees. "Ranger Hayes, Park Service," I called. "You folks all right?" No answer. When I stepped into the clearing, I saw the fire pit first. It was still smoking, half-eaten logs scattered, cookware overturned. A pan of beans lay in the dirt, still warm. Their truck was parked at the edge, doors open, dome light flickering weakly. "Hello?" I tried again. Nothing. Just the hum of crickets, faint but uneven. I checked the tent. The zipper hung halfway open, fabric sagging inward. 2 sleeping bags, one unrolled, one still folded tight. I found no blood, no drag marks, only the remains of a meal and 3 sets of footprints. 2 leading to the tree line, 1 leading back halfway, then turning around. Then I saw the marks. At first glance, they looked like animal claws, 4 deep gouges running down the side of a nearby pine. But as I leaned closer, the edges began to lighten. The grooves weren't carved, they were fading right in front of me. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was the beam of my flashlight, but the lines grew shallower until only faint streaks remained. I ran my hand over the bark. Smooth. I stepped back and caught my reflection in the truck window. For a moment, I thought I saw movement behind me, a flicker between the trees. I turned. Nothing there. Then, from deep in the woods, came the first sound. A cry that started as an animal call and ended as a human sob. It's hard to describe how wrong that sound felt. It carried the cadence of a person but the throat of something else. Short bursts of breath, then low whining, then silence. I radioed dispatch, told them I had a possible missing persons situation and was proceeding on foot. Static bled through the line before a voice cut in, a woman's, whispering so close I thought she was standing behind me. "Don't look up," she said. I turned anyway. The trees loomed like pillars against the sky. Moonlight spilled through gaps in the canopy, catching motes of dust that drifted upward, not down. My pulse pounded in my ears. The forest had gone quiet again, every insect holding its breath. I scanned with my flashlight. For an instant, I saw eyeshine 2 points, level with my head, then another pair lower, then more, scattered through the brush. Dozens! I shouted, "Park Service! Identify yourselves!" The eyes vanished. The motion sensor at the camp triggered again. I could hear its faint click from where I stood, but the thermal scanner stayed. Black zero heat signatures, as if the forest itself had tripped it. That's when the crying started again. Closer this time, overlapping voices calling for help. I stepped toward the sound. Careful. Slow. Branches snapped ahead of me. The beam of my flashlight shook against trunks that seemed closer than before. I swear the arrangement of the trees shifted between glances, gaps closing, new ones opening like the forest was rearranging itself one blink at a time. My breathing echoed oddly, coming back delayed, as though someone else were matching me. Then a whisper brushed my ear. "Behind you." I spun. Light sweeping the trail, nothing but dust. Yet the air felt disturbed, as if something large had just moved through it. I followed the trail deeper, marking each tree with chalk. The forest narrowed into a corridor. Somewhere ahead, faint rustlings circled, always staying the same distance away no matter how far I walked. The radio clicked again, static, folding into speech. It was my own voice. "Hayes, turn back." I froze. I hadn't transmitted anything. The mic was clipped to my shoulder, light steady green. I switched frequencies. The voice repeated. Same words, same tone. For a moment, I thought of calling for backup, but I knew response time from the main station was nearly an hour, so I pressed on. At the half-mile marker, the trail opened into a small clearing where the couple's footprints reappeared. They circled a fallen log, overlapped, then ended in the mud, as if both had stood there for a long time before walking into opposite directions. I found one shoe nearby, men's hiking boot, laces torn, but no drag marks, no sign of struggle, just that boot facing the camp like it had been set there deliberately. A distant flash lit the clouds, heat lightning with no thunder. The woods stayed still. Then I noticed movement near the ground, small shapes weaving between the roots, faster than my eyes could follow. My flashlight beam couldn't catch them. It slid off, as though the darkness itself bent around them. I backed up until I could see the campfire's ember glow through the trees again. That faint orange dot looked like salvation. But when I reached it, the fire was gone. The pit cold, the chairs and table overturned, and crouched beside the tent, lit only by the red LED of my dash cam on the truck across the clearing, was a figure. It looked almost human, but the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, neck angled forward, head tilting side to side like it was trying to understand light. Its skin, if that's what it was, reflected in patches, wet and uneven. I whispered, "Hey." It didn't move. I reached for my flare gun, keeping my light steady on it. The beam trembled slightly in my hand. When I fired the flare, the clearing exploded in red light. The figure recoiled, but not fast enough for one full heartbeat. I saw it clearly. Behind it, in every direction, stood dozens more, shapes rising from the brush, each motionless, each with those same unblinking eyes reflecting the flare's glow. None of them made a sound. The flare hissed down into the dirt and died. Darkness swallowed the clearing again. I stumbled backward toward the truck, fumbling for the door. The key slipped from my hand. When I bent to grab it, something moved in the reflection of the window, one of the shapes, standing inches behind me. I swung around. Empty space. I jumped inside, slammed the locks, hit the headlights. The beams cut through trunks but showed nothing human. Only shadows bending where the camper's tent had been. Then, from the forest, came a single sharp sound, fabric tearing from inside out. I don't remember driving out. I remember the gravel spraying behind the tires, the engine straining on the incline, the radio hissing in bursts that almost formed words. When I reached the ranger station, the clock read 3:17 a.m. I shut off the engine and sat there until dawn, trying to slow my breathing. When the recovery team arrived that morning, we went back to the site. The camp was there, tent shredded from within, chairs flattened, no footprints beyond my own. The dash cam still worked. It had recorded 9 hours of video. Most of it was static, but at one frame, just before the flare fired, you can see the outline of the first figure crouched by the tent. The next frame is the clearing lit red. The one after that is empty. No shapes, no movement, just the trees, and what looks like 100 faint eye marks reflecting the light, scattered high in the branches like they'd been watching from above. They told me it was pareidolia, trick of the light. Maybe it was. But sometimes, when I'm driving that road at night, the motion sensors still trip. No heat, no signature, just movement. And the monitors catch brief flashes, 2 points of reflection at eye level, staring straight at the lens. Every time I see it, I tell myself, it's an animal. Then I remember what the flare showed me, how many were standing there, perfectly still, waiting for the light to die. And I keep driving. Chapter 4. The Static Zone. They told me sound doesn't carry in the quiet zone. That was the first thing they said, and it sounded ridiculous to me. A valley where sound just dies? Where radios cut out, drones fall, and even your own echo gets swallowed? I've spent a decade working comms in every kind of terrain this park has to offer, from mountain ridges to flood basins, and I've never met a patch of air that could silence a man. So when they said they wanted me to go there, I agreed before they finished the briefing. It wasn't curiosity, it was pride. You see, When you're the only ranger with a background in communications tech, people start to expect answers from you. They think you can fix anything that plugs in or turns on. And when a place like the quiet zone starts erasing signal, all eyes point your way. I told myself it was just another interference problem, some geological quirk bouncing the signal out of range. I was wrong. The drive out was longer than I expected. The roads ended miles before my coordinates began, so I hiked the rest of the way with a gear pack, a drone case, and an analog compass that would later prove useless. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. I don't mean the normal kind of quiet, not like the calm that follows a windstorm or the stillness before dawn. This was absolute. Even the gravel beneath my boots sounded dull, like the air around me refused to carry the sound forward. I paused, listening. No birds, no insects, no rustle of brush. I tapped my radio once, a reflex. The light blinked green. I pressed the call button and spoke softly. "Base, this is Ranger Alvarez. I've entered the quiet zone perimeter." Nothing came back. Just a faint crackle, the first hint of what I'd hear for the rest of that assignment. Static. It started faint, like background noise. Then, as I stood there, it began to change. There's a rhythm to static, if you listen long enough. It's not uniform. It breathes. There are short bursts, long stretches, rises, and falls like waves. I'd spent enough time listening to open channels to know the difference between random noise and interference. This wasn't random. It was measured, like someone was turning a dial back and forth, watching to see how I'd react. I let it play for a while, then switched channels. The noise followed. No matter where I tuned, it was there. And then, buried under the hiss, my own name. Alvarez. A whisper. Clear, deliberate, and far too close. I froze. At first, I thought it was someone else on the line. Maybe one of the team back at headquarters trying to get through the interference. "Say again?" I asked. The static deepened, then cut out completely. Silence. That silence hit harder than the voice itself. It was like standing in a vacuum. Even my breathing sounded muffled. That was the first time I felt something wasn't right. Not fear, not yet, but the kind of awareness that makes you glance over your shoulder every few seconds, just to make sure the landscape hasn't shifted. I didn't know it then, but that silence was the sound of the valley listening back. By the time I reached the basin, the sun had already started its descent. The ground was cracked and dry, and there wasn't a single patch of grass anywhere. I set up my first relay tower near an old survey marker, one of the original ones from when the park boundaries were drawn decades ago. The metal plate was half buried, numbers worn smooth by weather. When I turned on the equipment, the power light blinked twice, then dimmed to red. The display flickered, trying to stabilize, then froze. I ran diagnostics, rechecked the connections. Nothing wrong with the power source. It was like the valley itself was pulling energy out of the devices. I swapped the battery for a new one, same thing. Drained in seconds. I noted the coordinates, logged the data manually, and decided to try the drone next. That was my first mistake. The drone launched perfectly. Smooth ascent, camera stable, no signal loss. For about 30 seconds, everything looked normal until the feed began to lag. At first, I thought it was the connection, but when I adjusted the controls, the lag wasn't consistent. The video feed paused, then jumped ahead several frames, like time itself was missing pieces. Then, the sound started. It wasn't the propeller hum or the wind, it was something layered beneath the ambient mic. Something faint and mechanical. I turned up the volume, leaning close to the monitor. Static. Again. But this time, it wasn't random. There were pauses, gaps, repetitions. I started jotting down the patterns on my notepad, and that's when I realized it resembled Morse code. Short, short, long, long, short, then a longer break. I didn't have my key sheet memorized anymore, but one sequence stood out, repeated 3 times in the middle of the transmission. Short, long, that's C. Then came a single long tone, followed by 3 short ones. That's B. And then silence. CB. Old-timers at the station used to talk about a decommissioned outpost called Camp Barlow, shut down after an electrical fire in the late 82nds. They said the rangers there complained about faulty radios, same as now. The logs were erased years ago, but the coordinates matched. The quiet zone sat right on top of where Camp Barlow used to be. The drone began to drop altitude. I didn't command it to. It just started sinking, like something invisible was pulling it down. Manual override, I muttered, punching the control pad. No response. I killed the power, remotely nothing. The drone ignored every input. Then, just before the feed cut out, I saw movement on the screen. A person no more than 50 feet below the drone standing still in the field, facing upward. They weren't moving, not even breathing, as far as I could tell. The drone feed glitched, skipped ahead, and when the frame stabilized, the figure was gone. The drone hit the ground seconds later. When I replayed the footage, the static pulsed again, louder this time. And underneath, so faint I almost missed it, my own voice said, "They're not ghosts. They're recordings." That line stayed with me. I didn't remember saying it, and I sure as hell hadn't transmitted it. I spent hours that evening trying to rationalize it. Maybe my voice had been picked up by accident, echoed from a previous log file. Maybe interference was scrambling signals from other frequencies and creating random fragments that sounded like speech. But then the pattern shifted. Each time I replayed the recording, the words changed slightly. They're not ghosts, they're recordings. They're not ghosts, we're recordings. Then just, help. I shut the player off. Outside, the wind had started up faint, dry, whispering through the brush. Except when I stepped out of my tent, the trees weren't moving. That was the first night I realized the static wasn't following my signal. It was following me. Chapter 2. The Whispering Caves. I've spent half my life listening to the way sound moves through rock, wind through the valleys, the low hum under the ridges, the slow, hollow beat that rolls through caves when you're deep enough that light can't reach you. But I've never heard anything like what I heard inside the Whispering Caves. It started as an assignment, nothing out of the ordinary. I was supervising a group of geological researchers from the university. They wanted to map a newly exposed system beneath Sage Creek Ridge, where a landslide had opened a crack large enough to crawl through. I was there for safety protocol, routine oversight. The first time I stepped into that opening, I felt the air shift, not colder, not heavier, just changed. Like the sound itself had thickened. My own footsteps didn't echo the way they should have. They came back too fast. Like something was walking just behind me, matching the rhythm. The researchers joked about it at first. One of them, a woman named Laura, said it was just the acoustics. Fractured limestone can play tricks on your hearing. I wanted to believe her. But even she stopped laughing when she heard her own voice whisper something she hadn't said yet. We entered early that morning. The entrance was narrow enough that we had to go single file. My flashlight cut a pale circle ahead, catching the shimmer of mineral veins across the walls. Everything was damp, the air tasted metallic. For the first hour, the cave behaved like any other. Tight passages, small drops, echoing drips of water. I kept track of our route using reflective markers every 20 yards. The sound of breathing filled the tunnels. Then the first echo came. It wasn't mine. We were standing at a fork, and one of the grad students, Daniel, called out to mark the turn. "Left tunnel looks clear." But before his words even faded, a voice repeated them, soft, close, and from behind us, every head turned. Flashlights swung toward the source. Nothing there but stone. Laura checked her recorder. It had caught the phrase twice, once when Daniel spoke, and again 3 seconds before he did. I didn't know how to respond to that. We listened again, rewound. The timestamps were clear. The echo had spoken before the sound existed. We kept going, but nobody talked much after that. The air seemed to grow tighter, like the cave was pressing its hands against our ears. The deeper we went, the more the sound warped. Footsteps began to overlap. Whispers started chasing our words. At one point, we stopped to rest near a chamber with a narrow shaft leading upward. When I set my pack down, I heard it faint laughter, childlike, curling through the stone like smoke. Laura's recorder picked it up too, followed by the sound of shuffling feet deeper in the tunnel. We assumed it was air movement, some weird vent effect. But then we heard Daniel's voice again, clear as day, though he hadn't spoken. "Don't go that way," it said. He looked at us, confused. I didn't say anything. When we replayed the recording, the voice was his. Same tone, same rhythm, only softer, like he was whispering from another room. That was when one of the others, a quiet man named Harris, muttered that something in the cave was mimicking us. I told him not to use that word. We needed to stay calm, keep moving, mark our path. Logic was all we had left. But logic stopped helping when the tunnel ahead opened into a dome chamber and our exit disappeared. We had been following the left-hand rule. Always take the left turn. Always mark with reflective tape. It should have been impossible to get lost. But when we came around a bend, we found our own footprints, same depth, same spacing, leading right back toward us. We turned around to retrace. The markers were gone, every last one. The walls even looked smoother, as if the rock itself had shifted. Laura's voice started, shaking when she spoke. "Ellis, do you hear that?" At first, I thought she meant the dripping water, but then I realized what she meant. The cave was whispering, thousands of overlapping murmurs, rising and falling with our breathing, some too low to understand, others just clear enough to form phrases. I caught one, just for a second. "Don't listen to me," it said, and it was my voice. We stood there for what felt like minutes, lights flickering. Then Harris started shouting something about hearing his mother's voice from one of the tunnels. Before I could stop him, he bolted into the dark. We chased him, but the tunnel forked again and again, narrowing until we had to crawl. The air was hot and stale. When we finally reached a dead end, there was no sign of him, only his helmet light lying in the dust, still on. We called and called. Each time, his name came back to us in his own tone, slightly delayed, slightly wrong. We tried heading back, The GPS tracker blinked wildly, spinning coordinates. My watch read 3:12, then 10:47, then blank. Laura began to cry quietly. She said she could hear someone breathing right next to her, even when no one was there. I could hear it too, a faint rasp that matched her rhythm exactly, half a second behind. Our last recording shows us standing at a junction. The lights flicker, and you can hear me say, "We're gonna find a way out." Then, a whisper answers, "We already did." When the lights steadied, the tunnel ahead looked familiar. The same scuff marks, the same cracks. We walked for another hour before realizing we were back at the starting chamber, the one with the shaft and the laughter. We had looped. By then, my flashlight was failing, and Laura's recorder had stopped working altogether. We sat in the dark, trying to stay calm. That's when I heard it again, my own voice whispering from the black, "Don't listen to me." And then the cave started to hum, a vibration so low it rattled our teeth. Dust rained from the ceiling, rocks shifting like breath through lungs. I remember shouting for Laura to move, to get clear. She screamed, and the sound echoed back before she even made it. After that, everything went silent. When I came to, I was lying near the entrance, my helmet cracked, one arm bruised. There was light spilling through from outside morning light. I called for the others. Nothing. No footprints near me. My backpack was gone, but the recorder was lying beside me, still on. It had captured 8 hours of audio. I listened to it later, at the station. The final minute was just static, then a faint whisper. It said, "Don't listen to me." And this time, the voice was Laura's. They sent a recovery team the next day. They found no trace of the others. No markers, no lights, no equipment. The cave had partially collapsed overnight. Geologists said, unstable structure, erosion, coincidence. But when I returned weeks later to leave a marker in their memory, I stood by the rock wall and whispered a single word, "Hello." The echo came back before I finished saying it, and it said my name. Park surveillance picks up all sorts of strange noise at night. Whine through canyons, shifting soil, the occasional coyote. But about 3 weeks after the incident, while I was cataloging data in the control room, one of the night cameras started transmitting audio. There was no wind that night, no movement in frame, just the steady hum of static until a whisper rose through it. "Don't listen to me." I froze. It was my own voice again, repeating like a breath. The timestamp matched the exact hour I'd last been in the cave. Since then, I've heard it more than once. Sometimes over the radio, sometimes when I'm walking alone through the valley. Always faint, always near rock walls, always before I speak. I used to think caves were just hollow spaces, voids carved by time and pressure. But now I wonder if there's something else entirely. Maybe they're listening. Maybe they remember. Maybe echoes aren't echoes at all. Maybe they're pieces of us that never found their way out. And sometimes, when I hear that whisper crawl out of the dark, repeating words I haven't said yet, I realize something that keeps me awake at night. I don't know which one of us is the echo anymore. Chapter 5. The Watcher of Pinnacle Point. I've spent most of my life on these ridges, long enough that I can tell the hour by how the wind tastes, long enough to know every call the elk make when the season turns. But there's one sound I never got used to, the silence that comes just before dawn when the valley goes still. Every branch, every wing beat, Every animal breath gone. That hush isn't peace. It's waiting. I first noticed it 27 years ago. The same summer, an intern asked me about the stories the old ranger tells about a shadow that watched from the cliffs. We used to joke about it around the fire, the way rookies do. The Watcher of Pinnacle Point, they called it. A name passed down like a warning no one truly believed. They said, you only see it when the sun touches both sides of the rock at once, dawn or dusk. Just a tall outline standing on the edge, never moving. Most of us shrugged it off as optical trickery, a play of light through morning. Mist. I did too, for a while, until the animals stopped crossing the northern ridge. That autumn, herds began turning away from the upper trails. Elk that should have followed the migration paths through Pinnacle Creek started detouring miles east. Coyotes that used to cry half the night fell silent. I kept telling myself there had to be a reason, scent of a predator, shift in vegetation, anything. But when I walked those paths, I found no tracks except my own. One morning, before the fog had burned off, I found claw marks in the sandstone. Long, deep grooves, too far apart for a cougar, too narrow for a bear. They ran in parallel lines, straight toward the cliff's edge, then stopped. No sign of what made them. That was the first time I felt something standing behind me, even though I knew I was alone. When I turned, the fog was folding back toward the ridge as if pushed by an unseen hand. Weeks passed. The reports began coming in, hikers saying they'd seen a figure up there. At sunrise, tall and still, sometimes leaning forward as if it were listening. I checked the area myself every evening. Nothing. But when I returned to the outpost and reviewed the time-lapse cameras, the shadows didn't line up. In one frame, the sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet, but there it was, a shape stretched across the rock before any light had reached it. A shadow moving ahead of the dawn. I replayed it frame by frame. It shifted slightly between shots, closer each time to the lens. The timestamp showed it lasted exactly 33 seconds, then vanished. I kept that footage to myself. There's a point in a man's career where you stop wanting answers and start fearing what the questions might cost. That winter, the weather turned harsh. Snow came early, thick and heavy. Maintenance crews pulled out of the upper trails, leaving me alone to check the markers before the closure. The silence up there was absolute. No birds, no echo, just the slow creak of the pack straps on my shoulders. At dusk, I reached the overlook locals called Pinnacle Point. From there, you can see miles of ridges fading into one another like waves of frozen dust. I set my thermos on the rail, wiped frost from the solar cam, and noticed new scratches in the guard post straight lines, deep, almost purposeful. When I bent to trace them with my glove, a reflection flashed across the metal, catching the dying light. Something was standing on the opposite ridge. At first, I thought it was a tree trunk, but trees don't shift weight from one leg to another. I raised my binoculars. The shape was human, or close enough to pass for one. Too tall, too thin, arms that hung too low. The moment I focused on it, the light dropped behind the ridge, and the figure vanished as though the dusk itself had folded around it. I stayed until the stars came out. Nothing moved, but the camera's motion sensor clicked 3 times while I stood still. Back at base, I checked the recordings. Each alert triggered before my own shadow crossed the frame, as though something ahead of me was tracing my movements. That's when I decided to run a controlled test. If something out there was bending the light or using it, I needed proof. The next evening I set 5 cameras across the upper ridge, each facing a different angle of the sunset. I synced their timers, checked the batteries twice, and waited. At 6:42 p.m., the first lens caught movement. Not a figure this time, just darkness pooling across the rock as the sun dropped. Then, one by one, the other cameras flickered out. Only the middle one kept running. In that final minute before the light was gone, it captured a shape rising from the shadow of the cliff itself. It didn't climb. It unfolded. I can't describe it any other way. Like the shadow had weight. Like it was peeling itself off the ground. The moment its outline matched mine, the footage ended. When I turned around, the cliff was empty. I tried to report it, but the file wouldn't upload. Every attempt crashed the system. When I played the clip back on a local drive, a low tone bled through the speakers, steady, pulsing, almost like a heartbeat played through static. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't shake the feeling that the valley wasn't just reflecting us, it was learning us. The next morning, the tracks returned. They started near my camp, one set only, and led straight toward the ridge where the cameras had been. Halfway there, the snow ended abruptly. Beyond that line, the ground was bare rock, warmed by sunlight that hadn't touched it yet. And in the center of that circle, my badge lay half-buried, bent, and blackened. I wear it on a lanyard. I never took it off. Yet there it was, pressed into the stone like it had melted through. When I reached for it, the wind rose for the first time in days, carrying a single whisper that came from every direction at once. It's been waiting long enough.